What is going on, Bruin Nation? LAFB followers, the madman is here, and the band is back together, even if for only one night. I got the man, the myth, the legend, the great Will the Thrill Decker with me here. So excited to be here. It's been a little bit since our last recording. This sort of spring period has been, taking a little bit of time off. I've sort of enjoyed really being a dad, a new time dad with our baby who's now 6 months old. So took a little time off to start the new year. But what better way to sort of begin the reveal of getting back into the swing of things with my main man, my brother from another mother, the man, the myth, the legend, the voice of UCLA LAFB for so many years, and one of my best friends, Will the Thrill Decker. Will, so great to see you, brother, and so excited to have the band back together, seeing you this weekend, and now obviously recapping all the great things. But first and foremost, how the heck are you, my friend?
Bro, I can't be any better after that intro, but I mean, we were talking about it. We're at practice, and I felt like Vince Vaughn at the beginning of Wedding Crashers, where you see the spring footballs get rolled out. The drills are coming. I'm yelling, it's wedding season for this football team. About to go nuts out there. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about. I mean, spring is in bloom. Football is on the way. College football is already back. There's nothing really better than just going and seeing the team develop. So many different storylines we could talk about, Madman. And it's just, man, I just had a ball with you on Saturday, just digesting all the new sights and sounds of this Bruins team that I think is going to leave an indelible mark, hopefully, on the LA community this year.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, Thriller, it was a great time. Obviously, the first of three really more open sessions of practice over this sort of spring period. Will and I will be there for all of them. And this was sort of practice one, our first take, our first look at this 2025 team, Will. And hard to believe that it's been about 4 months since the end of the season. In many ways, it feels like it was 4 days ago. In many ways, it feels like it was 4 years ago. Much has happened with UCLA football and just sort of the overall landscape of the sport since that last game of the season. But Will, so much to uncover, and I'm so excited to sort of dive deep here. I think we'll sort of start kind of position by position, if you will. And let's start a little bit on the offensive side of the ball, and then we'll sort of segue to defense. I think we have to begin the conversation here at the quarterback position.
Yes.
And, really excited to get your take, your assessment of things. Will, we got to see three quarterbacks really up close and personal over the course of the 2-hour spring practice here. Joey Aguilar, I've sort of nicknamed him Joey Football, is clearly sort of come in as QB1. I think we've got Luke Duncan slotted right now as QB2, and then Demarcus Davis as QB3, just in terms of reps and order of things. But Will, from my vantage point, felt like this is a much closer competition, I believe, from the eye test and just sort of from the analysis test than perhaps I think the narrative may suggest right now with UCLA football. I think Joey Aguilar, obviously a number of first-team reps there, did some good things. But Will, 2 interceptions in the 7-on-7 situation that was taking place there, both on deep balls. One where I thought it was a bad read. It was sort of crowded. The second, receiver was somewhat open, but the ball hung. So a little bit of concerns with Aguilar just in terms of deep ball velocity and just sort of vision down the field. He did have the 14 interceptions at Appalachian State last year. And so those habits seem to carry over. Now, again, it's just one practice that we're witnessing and this time to sort of get used to a new system. But I thought that was a little bit of a concern. And on top of that, I think the short ball was sort of lacking some precision and some touch. He did hit some really nice intermediate balls. But overall, I think it was sort of a so-so performance from Joey Aguilar. I thought Luke Duncan looked phenomenal, Will. And, we've sort of talked about this at length. He just looks like Curtis Rourke. I mean, when you think about Tino Sunseri's system at Indiana last year, obviously with Cignetti at the helm, Curtis Rourke and Luke Duncan, they look the same. They have that same high release, beautiful ball. And I thought Duncan threw a couple of really nice out routes and just tremendous zip on the ball and really threw receivers open. And then I think with Demarcus Davis, Will, and excited to get your thoughts.
Wow.
I think his ceiling is the highest. I mean, this guy is
Yeah.
an unbelievable athlete. I think he's still a little raw. To me, it feels like it's going to be kind of a two-horse race between Aguilar and Duncan, and I think that gap is closer than people realize. With Davis, I think, needing another year in the system, and then who knows where that can go. So what were your takes kind of in terms of the QB room and what you saw on Saturday?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a wide open competition is what I assess from what we were able to gather. Joey Aguilar making a big jump from Appalachian State. I know a lot of people are dead set on penciling him in as the starter. And I think we have to take a cautious approach to that because we just saw something very similar a few years ago with Colin Schlee coming in from Toledo. And he had starting experience. He started, 12, 13 games for the Toledo Rockets the year before. And he gets onto a bigger stage within the Pac-12 and, at times was maybe one of the more frustrating quarterback situations UCLA's had in a long stretch of time there. So I would preach patience with Aguilar. You mentioned the interceptions. I mean, 14 interceptions, guys. That is more than one a game at the college level. That is a lot of turnovers. And to his credit, he's got that gunslinging style that Brett Favre has. He made some plays, too. We saw him make, some very aggressive throws downfield. But those 2 interceptions stood out in practice after the 14 interceptions previously a year ago. I think if you want to control the football, what better option right now? And I know it's just a long way to go in camp, but we were impressed with Luke Duncan last year. And you put him in a system where Tino Sinceri is heading everything going on there. And Madman, Tino Sinceri coming over, what he did at Indiana last year was almost more impressive than what our former guy, D'Anton Lynn, did at UCLA. And I'll put it into terms. So D'Anton Lynn comes into UCLA, the 2022 season total defense, we were 92nd in the country. 2023, Madman, he takes us up to 14th. Right. Top 15, D'Anton Lynn balls out. Madman, Indiana's total offense, scoring offense, 105 in 2023. Do you want to know where they landed? In
5.
Number 2 in the entire country, second to only Miami, and they were number 2 in passing efficiency, led with Curtis Rourke, led with Tino Sinceri, just trailing Ole Miss and Jackson Dart last year in a Lane Kiffin offense. This guy is brilliant. UCLA's hire is not being talked about enough. Ben Bolt just had that awesome piece with Tino Sinceri, kind of introducing him back to the world where he was a ball boy for the Carolina Panthers when Deshaun Foster's there. What small world is that? But if you're picking the player that is most similar to what worked last year at Indiana with Curtis Rourke, it's unquestionably Duncan, the body type, the point guard approach. I mean, that's what it looked like. He's splashing the football all around the field. He made the prettiest throw by a mile. It was like a 17-yard out route. 1 foot in bounds. I mean, we were standing with the fans in the parking lot. It was just a collective woo from the crowd when that pass was made by parents, fans alike, parents of teammates on this team for UCLA. So, Luke Duncan, do not sleep on this kid. I got down on the field after, and whether this factors in or not, he looks like he's a quarterback out of Central Casting, like the way this guy looks. He looks like an actor on the side. So I'm like, he's just got that it factor to him, man. And I could easily see Luke Duncan shooting up the depth chart. And maybe I would put my money on Aguilar probably starting opening day.
Yep.
But boy, if he struggles early, Duncan and Demarcus Davis, holy smokes. If he looks like a creative player you put on the freaking NCAA football 2025, he's just bigger, faster, stronger than everybody else. When he gets a grip on this offense and really kind of develops those tools, holy smokes, UCLA's quarterback room is incredible. We didn't even talk about McDaniel in that room, the former 4-star that came in the spring early to train. Henry Hasselbeck, the lineage, the Hasselbeck family's in there. Cox, what a loaded quarterback room. There's no excuse, as we've talked about for so long, for UCLA to be a dormant program. We've got so much opportunity here. And I think Tino and, Deshaun and, Malloy have a really good plan to get us back on top.
No, so well said, Will. And that that collective whoosh that you mentioned about Luke Duncan, I mean, we were there for it. And, you know, what was even more impressive, Will, it was a near side hash throw, you know, so that window, I mean, you're trying to jam, you know, sort of a 300-pound person in a phone booth, you know, I mean, with that throw in terms of precision. And it was just absolutely remarkable. And so I think this is going to be a battle here, Will, as we go into the weeks to come. I think Aguilar, with the experience, it just feels like he's got pole position. But I think if you sort of close your eyes and look at the eye test, this is a lot closer than I think the narrative is giving suggestions for. Anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, you know, and just from like the stat wise, you know, I was kind of counting to myself what Duncan was doing. I know you were doing the same. I think he was like 7 of 9, 8 of 10 through the air in those drills where, you know, turnover free football, moving the football, making the smart, elegant play out there. And just with Aguilar, it felt like he was like, you know, 50% on his passes, you know, missed some really good reads there at times. And granted, that's going to come. He's going to learn the system. He's going to learn the players he's with, more importantly. But I kind of go back to this one stat that I have in my mind where when you're making the jump from mid-major to a power 3 school it is now, you know, I would say 4 out of 5 guys are just there to collect a jersey and just kind of be a depth piece. I'm not trying to shade anybody. I'm not trying to, you know, put anybody down. That's just kind of the reality of making that jump. 4 out of 5 guys kind of regress from their starting spot or where they were at because it's just a harder environment to produce. And I think Aguilar, for, you know, he was a 2-year starter at Appalachian State. He made it further than so many other players did. So I don't want to, you know, discredit what he was able to do there. I'm just saying he's walking into a very, very talented quarterback room, and he's going to have to fight like hell to keep his job at the end of the day.
No, really well said, Will. And truth be told, to sort of keep it balanced, I think this is going to be neck and neck to our point. You know, Duncan also, I think, struggled at times in practice, not necessarily with zip on the ball or accuracy or the throws, but sometimes there was sort of a timing element where, you know, he held the ball a little bit longer. And because there isn't sort of a pass rush to feel it, you don't always sort of feel it. But I think that's going to really come with time. And I think, Will, you said it best. I mean, you know, when you sort of make that jump to mid-major, it's going to be key. Now, having said that, our guy, Curtis Rourke, that we were referencing at Indiana, that went from the 105 offense to the number 2 offense, he came in from James Madison.
He did.
You know, is Sunseri, you know, again, kind of looking for lightning to strike again. And as we all know, Aguilar at App State, you know, played so well in that playoff game against James Madison. That's really what caught Sunseri's eye. So all to say, I think this is going to be a neck and neck race. Aguilar will probably get the opening day start, but don't be surprised, Bruin Nation, if Luke Duncan makes an appearance and makes a huge impact on the 2025 season sooner rather than later. We'll segueing, you know, to, and I'll hit it to you, but segueing to the receiver side, because the guys that they were throwing it to, I think what made it even more impressive was, you know, that other end. And this was sort of the first year, Will, after a few years, that we didn't have our man, J. Michael Sturdivant, out there who was just embarrassing people the last couple of years.
Oh,
you know, this was sort of J. Mike's time, you know, in terms of at the beginning of the season, just sort of creating 4 or 5 yards of separation on anybody, and it didn't matter. That wasn't quite the case this go around. It was a much more competitive, balanced situation at the wide receiver level. I think we were very excited to see Quasi Gilmore continue his progression. I think we're expecting big things from Quasi in year 2 after breaking out as a freshman. Always so excited to see our main man, TMA. I think he's going to play a huge role on this team. And then I thought what was interesting, Will, to both of our points as we were discussing, who's going to be in sort of that slot, that third wide receiver role. And right now it's looking like Mikey Matthews, you know, the transfer from Cal, done some really nice things. But that Jaden Wilson kid from Arkansas, there is a gear to him, Will. There is a gear to him. And wouldn't it be something, you know, in a certain package, if you had Gilmore on one side and Wilson on the other side, and you know, you sort of go 4 wide and let Matthews and TMA kind of do their things in the slot. So really interesting, I think, wide receiver dynamic. Those are the 3 or 4 that I think really bubbled up. And then we asked the question, we're like, man, where is Rico Flores? I mean, we haven't seen Rico Flores since, early fall last year. And then lo and behold, Ben Bolch, our good friend at the LA Times, sort of had that tweet, this week about
dig deep for that, Mad. Yeah.
Dig deep. That was a deep. I mean, there was digging deep for sure. Thriller that Rico's still sort of recovering from the surgery from last year and is sort of targeting a September or October return. And I got to be honest, Will, that's a tough time to kind of come back. When you miss that whole chunk of 2024, you miss spring ball in 2025. I don't know if it's realistic for Rico Flores to expect any sort of an impact for 25. I think most probably he's going to take a medical redshirt this year. And I think that really leaves us with these four receivers, I think, rising above the rest. Will, your take on the receivers and the overall passing game?
Yeah, I think the receiving room got handed a baton that kind of continues this era of just having really talented playmakers, whether it was from the Chip Kelly era, now the Deshaun Foster area. I mean, you mentioned Jaden Wilson. My God, it looked like Speedy Gonzalez out there. I mean, the speed was breathtaking to watch. I would if the whole team was lining up, defensive backs included, running backs, whoever you want to put out there, I'd put a crisp $100 bill on Jaden Wilson dusting the field out there when it comes to running. He's got a track background. He's got 2 years of eligibility from DeSoto, Texas, formerly of Arkansas. We're going to get to more Arkansas guys on this podcast. Thank you, Razorbacks, for letting us get a couple guys from you. 15 catches, 199 yards last year for 2 touchdowns. And I think he's just scratching the surface because that SEC speed, like that elite high-tier SEC speed, it's not the character of the Big Ten when you think about it. The Big Ten is the brute offensive lines, the strong defensive lines. Yes, Ohio State's got their playmakers. They're kind of an outlier because they're so national and so big. But if you're just talking about traditional Big Ten, I mean, Penn State made the Final Four last year without a credible receiving option. I mean, Tyler Warren's fantastic at the tight end position. I'm not taking anything away from that. But from the strictly receiver spot, ask Drew Allar what was going on there. I mean, he didn't have anything in the receiver room last year. So adding a guy like Jaden Wilson that has that top, like, breathtaking speed in the open field, like, there's going to be a couple plays, I'm going to predict it now, where 50 yards downfield. Remember that play Quasi had against Nebraska?
Yep.
Where he got out of the break, was wide open. Quasi and freaking Jaden Wilson, just the speed bash bros in the open field. I'm excited to see what happens there. And, I think one of the most underrated pickups, my last year, was the most underrated pickup we had, in my opinion, was Bryce Pierre, because we needed that backup tight end after Hudson Habermill went down. And Pierre made some nice catches. He was a great depth add. We needed that, backbone to kind of give Matavo, some time off, in between plays. Mikey Matthews is huge, man, because TMA, I love him to death. His dad listens to this show. The family loves the Bruin Bible, but he has not been able to stay healthy, and it sucks because we love Titus and we want to see him succeed. Mikey Matthews is that insurance to the wide receiver room that Bryce Pierre was to Maliki Matavap. So Mikey Matthews comes in from Cal, 32 catches, 272 yards and a touchdown. Really like what I see from the group. It's like, it's not the best receiver group we've had, but it's a group where I'm not worried about it, if that makes any sense. I think it's a very solid group. I think Quasi can make that next jump, to maybe just honorable mention all Big Ten. I think would be a huge step forward for him in terms of the grading system, and, some big Jaden Wilson touchdowns and some Titus and some Mikey, move the chains on 3rd and 7, type of scenarios. That's all you need. We got enough we got enough talent in that room to succeed, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
No, I think really well said, Will. And, I think Jaden Wilson's going to have one of those years, Will, to your point, where it might be like 20 or 25 catches, but it might be 20 or 25 catches for like 500 yards. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And 4 or 5 touchdowns. Like, Jaden Wilson could have like 3 50-plus yard touchdowns this year, just as that prototypical kind of deep guy. And particularly whether it is a Luke Duncan back there, who with that exquisite arm and, sort of a pass rush coming and kind of going for the deep ball, or if it is a Joey Aguilar who's back there trying to make plays, scramble on a broken play, and Wilson kind of cuts it deep. You can see either of those scenarios really play out in a very significant way. And Will, what I like is both Matthews as well as Wilson are coming from other Division One programs. You mentioned the Wilson pedigree from the SEC, but even Matthews. I mean, Matthews was at Cal. Matthews was at Utah prior to that. I mean, these were really great programs. So they're going to come in and just plug right in. And I think describing Matthews as that insurance to TMA is really a great way to sort of build it. I also think depending on the quarterback, Will, is where you may go. I think if it is Aguilar at the start, I see a world where both TMA and Matthews start, and you have Gilmer, as sort of your deeper option. But if you end up sort of segueing at some point in the year to a bigger armed Luke Duncan, you may then change that approach and sort of go more vertical and bring in Wilson into that front three to be able to start. So really exciting stuff. I think we got a really good situation there in the passing game. Will segueing to sort of the running game. And the running game goes hand in hand with the offensive line. And I think one of the big takeaways for me is just looking at the sideline. I know it was for you as well. Looking at the sideline this year and just seeing the big bodies on the sideline, seeing the quality of big body, the quantity of big body in a way that we did not see this time last year. This time last year when we walked into spring practice early, it was kind of like, okay, where's the team? It almost felt a little Giants-ish, to be honest, at that particular point at the start of spring practice, and said, oh man, we're really going to have to do some work here in the portal for the offensive line. Not the case this year, Will. I mean, when you look at Eugene Brooks, when you look at Julian Armella, when you look at Cortland Ford, and them kind of sitting themselves, standing side by side with a DiGiorgio, and sort of looking at it from that perspective. Katie Arnold, you're sort of lining these guys up. It's, this is now a very credible offensive line in the Big Ten. And I'm very excited that this is an offensive line that's looking like it's going to be 8-9 deep of really sort of quality size. And I think that's going to be really, really significant. And I think who is going to be back there, Will, I think two guys from a running back position seem to separate a little bit in terms of just how they look, how they did with cuts, how they did with the sort of comfort level with the ball. I think Anthony Woods is going to be really fun. And just the way he cuts and moves. And obviously he didn't get much run last year because of injuries and whatnot. He just looks fresh. He looks spry. I think there's going to be a spring to his step. He's twitchy and very, very explosive. He sort of reminds me a little bit of kind of Keegan with more twitch, to be honest with you, with Anthony Woods. And then our good friend, Mr. Berger, is back. And I think kind of your classic downhill Big Ten running back masher. I think the two of them behind, I think, this revamped offensive line that's looking much more like a Big Ten offensive line, I think is going to be really exciting to see. And that coupled with this passing game, I think, Will, we're in a position here with Tino Sunseri with the keys to the kingdom. I don't think scoring is going to be a challenge for this team the way it was last year. I think this is a team that's going to be able to score and do so in a variety of ways. Your thoughts on the interior and the running game?
Well, I think the thing I'm most excited about is the offensive line. Let's go through the new additions and their weights and what they're listed at. Eugene Brooks, Oklahoma, transfer. Former top 100 recruit from Sierra Canyon. We thought it was a basketball school. They got football guys there.
They got football too.
6'3", 336 pounds on the interior. Yep. That's what they're saying. Katie Arnold, the transfer from Jacksonville State. More of a project, but just the body type is undeniable. 6'7", 315 pounds. Julian Armella, Florida State transfer. This guy was on the Florida State team that should have been in the college football playoff 2 years ago. 6'6", 325 pounds. He was actually on the field after practice signing autographs. Just a friendly giant, just a nice guy. He was chatting with the fans, liked him a lot. And then Cortland Ford, 6'6", 327 pounds. Madman. I think the jump from last year to this year is like looking at the freshman football team in high school and then going straight to the varsity. The gap is that big. It is unbelievable. The good old-fashioned American beef this team has added to the offensive line. This is what it takes to be a Big Ten offensive line. And I give Deshaun and this entire staff credit. Because we looked at the offensive line last year. We go, it's going to be a long freaking year. And that was the problem of the entire offense. If you solidified the offensive line last year, this defense was frankly very good. That front seven is an all-time front seven unit within UCLA. I mean, look how high Schlesinger is now mocking in these drafts. Look at how high Femi's going in his dominant performance of the Senior Bowl. These were NFL caliber players that we had almost everything but an offensive line last year. And you get in guys from just programs. Cortland Ford, another USC guy, went to Kentucky, comes back. He's going to be playing for UCLA. Armella at Florida State. Eugene Brooks was at Oklahoma. These are guys that have been to pedigree programs.
No question.
With size and skill that are just going to beef up this offensive line and give us the best that we've got. And you add DeGiorgio and a Sam Yoon coming back. I mean, it's almost, a top six that, was just unforeseeable last year. So it's such a huge gap in terms of where we are compared to last year. And you added Anthony Woods, didn't play at Utah last year, but he was an 1,100-yard rusher at Idaho, 16 touchdowns on the ground for the Vandals. There's something there. And he's going to have, if this offensive line's half as good as I think it's going to be, there's going to be room for him to kind of explode there. We're going to call him the smash burger, Jalen Berger coming in there, man, because this guy can ball out. I thought he should have gotten more run last year. We both talked about this at lengths on end. And then, the guy that there was kind of frisky out there is Frias again, the Kansas State transfer. Anthony Frias gets in there, gets his touches, makes some plays, and similar to the wide receiver room, what I'm never going to feel nervous about with a Deshaun Foster coach team is the running backs room.
No question.
He was the best running backs coach in college football by the time he took over the head coaching job. So I'm not worried about the running backs, and I'm even less worried about them knowing what they got in front with the freaking big uglies looking like an NFL roster. It's unbelievable.
No, it's totally spot on there, Will. I mean, to get 4 300-plus pound guys, and really, I mean, we'll take it one step further. 4 guys north of 315 is absolutely sensational. And that was really, I think, the focus of the transfer portal early, and it has paid huge dividends. Again, guys from pedigreed programs, Oklahoma, Florida State, and the like, and then guys who have the size to really be able to compete in the Big Ten. Well, it feels like it's going to be kind of Yoon, I think Brooks, Armella, Cortland Ford, and probably DeGiorgio as that fifth starter. I see Arnold as coming in as sort of a rotational piece right off of that, along with some of the younger guys. But I think that 5 with Arnold as a 6 and some of the younger guys developing, again, you're now credibly 8-9 deep. Obviously, over the course of a season, you're always going to have injuries. You need sort of a next man up type of mentality and just the wear and tear of a Big Ten season. So this team looks ready to really compete in the trenches on the offensive side of the ball, Will, and it's just so exciting. And between that and the passing game, like we talked about, and Sunseri's gifts as an offensive play caller, this is a UCLA team that we should be expecting to be north of 30 points a game. And that should put them in a situation where they have an opportunity to win the vast majority of their games going into the second half. So I think there's a lot to be excited about there, Will. Flipping over now, other side of the ball on defense. Now, again, the spring practices, it's harder for the defense to sort of stand out and make an impact. There's no tackling. And so, it's harder to sort of assess. There aren't really sort of individual defensive drills the way there are with offense. I think this, though, Will, the way we felt about the offensive line last year, I think there's some similar questions about the defensive line this year. And when you think about what UCLA has lost in the front seven over the last 2 seasons, I mean, you alluded to it. We talked about the fearsome foursome with Toia and Schwess and Madrano and Femi. And then let's go back the year before. Mr. Leatu Latu, number 15 pick in the NFL draft to the Indianapolis Colts. And then the Murphy twins. Awesome. And then sort of Carl Jones on top of that. Wausau. That is a ton to lose over a 2-year period. That's a ton to lose for anybody, Will. That's a lot.
Nine
to lose
NFL guys. Nine
NFL guys. Whether you're Georgia, whether you're Bama, whether you're Michigan, Ohio State, I don't care who you are. That's a lot to lose. And so I think there is the sense that this is going to be a bit of a step back defensively from a front seven perspective. I am really excited to see how Nico de Villiers, to your point, transitions. I think he's going to really need to step in from a leadership perspective and a performance perspective on that defensive line. And then I think we're also very excited to see what Isaiah Chisholm can do. The transfer from Oregon State at linebacker. I think those two are sort of some anchor pieces. We get the Grant Buckeys back. Hopefully Gary Smith III is healthy this year, and we sort of get to a place. Keanu Williams, we've got some opportunity here to sort of fill some needs there, but it is a little bit thinner. We're really going to need the likes of a de Villiers and a Chisholm to appear. I know even in the linebacking room, there's some thoughts with some of these young kids kind of making some jumps. And then, on the secondary side, Will, just so deep, right? I mean, we brought in 8 defensive backs. They did a really nice job at spring. I mean, to our earlier point, wasn't a ton of separation out there, Will, from a wide receiver perspective. I think one of the reasons why we were so impressed with Duncan was his ability to throw in such tight windows because there wasn't a ton of separation. So I think the secondary is looking deep. I don't know if there's necessarily stars that have emerged yet. I think as a group, they're all looking very competitive, very disciplined, tacticians out there. But I think the big question for this team, and I think the single greatest barometer, is going to be quarterback play. And then right after that is going to be how does this front seven going to mature and hold up? Will, your thoughts on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it's a really interesting bunch. And we sat next to actually Ashton Sanders' dad, who is Oklahoma defensive tackle transfer. I went to Cathedral High School here in Southern California. The defensive tackle depth doesn't actually look terrible now that you really break it down. You got Gary Smith coming back. I've always been a big fan of Keanu Williams and potentially his ceiling. Sion Tapaki coming back. I know Toia referenced him at Big Ten Media Day last year as a guy to kind of watch out for. So you have, I would say like B-, C+ depth at the defensive tackle, but it's all going to be coming down to how you can pass rush and get to the quarterback.
The edge.
Jacob Busic comes back, who, former Navy transfer. He's a hardworking dude. I don't know if he has the top end, athleticism to get to the quarterback that you're looking for. Nico de Villiers, very excited about the potential there. Big kid, I think he's like 6'4", 271 pounds out there. Only 1 sack, though, in 2 years. So, not a lot of production there. And that's kind of who we're hanging our hat on in terms of getting to the quarterback. I mean, our defensive end depth was so bad last year, Madman. We moved Femi to the edge. And Femi, lo and behold, was a revelation at the edge.
Yeah.
But that wasn't intended to be the case because we had to move him there because it was so bad in the first place. And we didn't do a ton to address it. So I think if you have to pull out one key hole of this team, it's going to be de Villiers, leading that unit, because there's just not a lot going on there. I'm excited about de Villiers, but this is the year Ilkaika Malloy is going to have to, earn that paycheck, so to speak, because we're going to have to get after the quarterback somehow. And what the Big Ten is known for, I mentioned at the top, those offensive lines are complete. Those Iowas, those Ohio States, those Michigans, those Penn States, those guys are just known as the bread and butter when it comes to offensive line. Wisconsin, Joe Thomas back in the day. This is what this conference does, and it does it at a very, very high level. So we're going to have to find ways to get to the quarterback. I'm actually really encouraged about the linebacking room. Chisholm is there. And I don't know if you read this, man. John Vaughns is expected to come back in the linebacking room. So you got Chisholm, who's like a undersized 6 foot, 218-pound linebacker. Vaughns is right in that range. We may have the fastest linebacking room of starters in the Big Ten between Chisholm and John Vaughns coming back. Because Vaughns was playing like a safety. That's why we loved him.
Yeah, he's that. Vaughns, when it's clicking for Vaughns, Will, and there's been such a challenge the last couple of years with him between injuries and then baseball season, and it just feels like it just either the lather or the run or the endurance hasn't been there. But when Vaughns is right, I mean, you're talking about a Derwin James type of body and versatility. And I completely agree with you. I mean, it's a total game changer if we can get a locked-in John Vaughns physically as well as sort of mentally.
And maybe this is the year he ultimately goes to baseball. But as it stands right now in the 2025 UCLA football spring roster, number 6 is back in a Bruins uniform for football. So let's hope that goes well. When it comes to the secondary, I mean, that is, to me, that's up there with, I think the running back room with the least I'm concerned of. We got Coach Meat back there who recruited his tail off in the transfer portal. Let's just go through the names. I mean, we got some guys, Robert Stafford, former 4-star recruit coming from Miami. He looked legit out there. He's number 3 on the practice field.
He matched up really well with Gilmer, on Saturday. There was some really nice battles there. That was a toe-to-toe. Was very impressed with Stafford.
2 legit recruits too. Those are guys that had their pick of offers and where they wanted to go. Then they just somehow both wound up at UCLA. You had Key Lawrence out there, the former Ole Miss guy, former Tennessee guy. He made a nice play on the football there. He's a safety coming in there, trying to replace the likes of your Ramon Hendersons and things like that. Cole Martin's there, Meach Martin's son coming from Arizona State. I mean, you have – I'm not even done yet. I think Cole, who else am I missing here? Scooter Jackson, coming, transferring in. We got Andre Jordan, who made an interception in practice. 6'1", 183 pounds. He's a bigger corner. So I like what he can potentially bring to the table. I mean, Aaron Williams, the Louisville guy, he was the tall corner we were talking about. A legit 6'2", 185 pounds in there. He's kind of that Richard Sherman mold on the outside. I am not worried about this. And you couple that with a guy who I really liked last year in spring that was taking on everyone. If you remember in the spring football game, the closest thing we got to a game was those one-on-one practice reps. Namir Benjamin, coming back. So, you just have guys – It's too talented of a room. Byron 3, I'm still listing off guys. The University of Central Florida transfer. So, there's just too many bodies in that room with too much credibility to be a bad corner room. The problem is if you look around the Big Ten, it's not a passing conference. It's ground and pound. But when it comes to those 3rd and longs, and we're going to have to defend, I feel pretty confident about what this unit can do if it lives up to the hype and, Coach Martin can coach these guys up the right way.
No, I think, really well said, Will. The back end is just really deep. And so, and deep from a perspective of very interchangeable parts schematically, but also there's really no level drop off between, corner 1 and corner 6. You've got pretty consistent play in terms of athleticism, in terms of just competitiveness and so forth. So I think we're least concerned about that, to your point. The challenge, though, Will, is, and you alluded to this, when you think about this conference and when you think about, to your point, hey, let's put Ohio State aside for a second. Let's put maybe Oregon aside for a second, those 2 teams. Everybody else is a run-heavy offense where they're going to run more than they throw. And in some cases, it's almost 60-40, 62-38. I mean, it's very, very run heavy. And so the question, I think, for us is going to be, in these winnable games over the course of the season, how does this front 7 stack up, and how do they stay fresh, and how do they hang into a game, play over play, quarter over quarter? I think that's going to be the massive question moving forward. And Will, the recipe may very well be this year. We've seen this over the course of the Big Ten. We've seen this in the Heritage Pac-12, where certain teams have really great seasons because they were very opportunistic defensively. And it may very well be that this year's UCLA team, it may be, look, this is a team that's going to give up their share of yards, but they're going to be very opportunistic defensively.
And they win the turnover battle.
They're going to win that turnover battle. I think a lot of some of those teams, the Washington team the year before, Will, they went to the playoff, were very opportunistic, and then they were also very opportunistic that playoff year.
And don't break type of defense.
Exactly. Bend but don't break. You think about that USC team, that first Caleb Williams year, if you recall, very much opportunity. They were sort of getting shredded defensively, but they were finding a way. They were finding a way to make the plays. So I think that's maybe where this needs to be defensively for UCLA. Let's hope that there's more development and more growth in the weight room and whatnot. But I think this is probably going to have to be a team that bends but don't break and score north of 30 on the other side. And I could see a world where there's a lot of 30-27 type of games, 31-24 type of games, 34-27 type of games that are going to kind of come down to the end. And so I think it should be very exciting. Your thoughts on that?
I completely agree, and I just want to do a couple more points. One, you brought up that USC defense that was bend, don't break, when they had the biggest choke job I've ever seen in my life in the Cotton Bowl against Tulane Green Waves. I got to order a Tulane shirt to come to the house just for even thinking about that moment and what Tyjae Spears did to that defense. And second, I'm going to give you guys a little key in on why I think Luke Duncan has a real shot at the starting quarterback job. Sinceri is all about completion percentage.
Yep.
He took, Curtis Rourke went
Great
from
point.
63%, at James Madison. He shot up to about 70% completion rate last year at Indiana. Guys, Aguilar completed 55% of his passes last year with 14 picks. I don't know if he's the guy. I got to be honest with you guys, for a Sinceri-like system. It's going to take him some time to figure it out, but do not rule out the likes of the great Luke Duncan, who may resurrect the UCLA football program as we know it, baby.
I love it. Well, Will, this has been so fun. The time flies when you have a great time, and it's always so great to do this with you, my friend. We'll be at the next sort of public spring practice. There's the spring showcase as well. So for folks that are out there, that one I think is going to be like a Friday evening. We'll be out there hanging out. I think I'm going to bring Papa Madney with me, and the three of us will be hanging out. The Thrill, the Madman, and Papa Madney. Come on out, support the team, say hi, have a chat, and excited to sort of continue to break it down. Folks, we are sort of back in the game. Kind of spring break, if you will, is over, and this show is going to be much more regular as it was at the end of the year. We'll be back later this week. I think we'll probably get Wayne Cook on at some point over the next few days. We'll sort of recap the basketball season as well. And as always, things never stop when it comes to all things Deshaun Foster and football. So, folks, have a great one. Can't wait for the next one. Thriller, thank you so much as always. And 4's up forever.